Hello, this is Luke.
Hi, Luke. This is Greg from Woodward Strategies. Do you have a minute?
What's this call regarding?
In the first few seconds of a cold call, your prospect needs to reach a point of relevant clarity, and to get them there isn't complicated. What you need to do is provide just enough criteria to promote an image of what you represent, and then associate that image with something that's familiar to them. The first job of a cold call is to get the prospect who you're catching off guard to become present with you in the discussion. Otherwise, they'll become too distracted to engage with. In this video, I'm going to show you what I call the relevant clarity sequence and exactly how to use it in the first few seconds of a cold call to set the foundation for a productive discussion. But before we get into how it works, it's important to really understand the psychology behind it and why it works. So here's 3 things you need to know. Number 1, what robs a prospect from being present at the start of a cold call are lingering questions that form in their mind, okay? When the prospect starts thinking things like, am I supposed to know who this is? Or what was the company called again? Then they become too distracted to engage with, and you lose control over the call. Number 2, when cold calling prospects, you're dealing with an emotional decision process, not a logical one. Number 3, the way we receive information when caught off guard is not the same as it is in a normal discussion. Our brains run on overdrive behind the scenes to connect dots between what's in front of us and what's relevant and familiar to us. And that's what governs what we notice and what we don't. When caught off guard, the way we receive information is much the same as it is when we're walking down the street, for instance. It starts with an image, which in most cases passes by unnoticed. It's only when the image connects with some kind of emotion, which in this case would be something relevant or familiar, that we become consciously aware of it. And our brains do this with everything. For example, if you've ever bought a car and the next day you start seeing it everywhere, whereas before you never really noticed it, that's the part of your brain called the reticular activating system, flagging the car for you to notice because it knows it's relevant and it knows it's a part of your world now. In the first few seconds of a cold call, a mental image backed by something familiar is exactly what your prospect's mind needs to quiet down and become present with you in the discussion. So here's an example of what failing to do this correctly on a cold call sounds like. And role-playing with me here is Luke Bowen. In real life, Luke is the CEO of a top-tier craft beer company on the East Coast. But in this example, he's playing a chief revenue officer that I'm cold calling on behalf of Woodward Strategies. Listen carefully here to the start of the call, the first few seconds, and see if you can identify what I'm doing that's triggering resistance and lingering questions in Luke's mind. Okay, so here we go.
Hello, this is Luke.
Hi, Luke. This is Greg from Woodward Strategies. Do you have a minute?
What's this call regarding?
Well, I was doing some research on your company and see that you lead a team of outbound sales reps. So I wanted to share some.
Wait. What's your company called again?
Woodward Strategies.
Strategies?
Woodward Strategies. Woodward
Okay.
Strategies. Okay. Yeah, so we help venture-backed B2B companies ramp and scale outbound prospecting with a 6-week program specifically for outbound sales reps. But the reason for my call, I wanted to share some information with you to see if you'd be open to speaking with me sometime next week. If I send something over, would you have a chance to take a look at it?
I guess so. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what Woodward Strategies does.
Well, we work with B2B tech companies to ramp and scale outbound across their sales team.
Okay, so you're something like a marketing agency. Do you need somebody to talk to somebody from our company in marketing?
No, not a marketing agency.
No.
I typically talk to sales leaders because our program is specifically for their outbound sales team.
Wait, look,
And
I'm not sure I'm the right person for you. I
Okay.
gotta go. Bye.
Clearly didn't end well. Notice in this example, I stated my first name using a tonality that sounded somewhat familiar. Doing that can trigger a lingering question like, do I know who this is? Have I talked to this person before? And when the mind starts spinning around on lingering questions, it becomes distracted and it can't process what's going on in the conversation. I'm sure you can relate to this. Can you think of a time when you were reading a book and your mind began to wander off thinking about something else, maybe something you had to do that day? And suddenly you realize that the past few pages, you have no idea what it was about. That's the same thing that's happening on a cold call when your prospect's mind gets hung up on a lingering question. You may have noticed that I used an upward tonality when asking Luke if he had a minute. Upward tonality in this case conveys neediness and can sound salesy, but more important than that, do you have a minute is a yes question, meaning that I want the answer to be yes. And I asked it without first providing context. And doing that triggers more lingering questions in Luke's mind about what I'm really asking him for. So after all this, you can hear Luke becomes hesitant and starts to put up a guard by asking what the call's regarding. And as we get into it, we start tripping over each other, and the lingering questions in Luke's mind are continuing to distract him, so he's not present with me in the discussion. And as this goes on, Luke starts cutting in abruptly with questions, and now he's the one commanding responses, so I've lost the control position on the call. Can you see how delicate this is? In just a few seconds, because I failed to take Luke to a point of relevant clarity, he became too frustrated to engage with, and he took the path of least resistance by ending the call. So here's an example of the same call, where in the first few seconds, I take Luke to a point of relevant clarity, and I do this by promoting an image of what I represent, and then associating that image with something familiar and relevant to him. I also provided necessary context leading up to the yes question to avoid triggering lingering questions and remove resistance. So see if you can identify where I'm doing this. So here we go.
Hello, this is Luke.
Hi, Luke. My name's Greg Woodward. I'm a consultant based in DC. I work with another company in the venture fund portfolio called NewCo. I'm just calling with a question. Do you have a minute?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. My firm's called Woodward Strategies, and we help venture-backed B2B companies ramp and scale outbound prospecting with a 6-week program specifically for SDRs. But the reason for my call, NewCo has given me permission to speak with other venture fund portfolio companies about the results they're seeing from the program. And I see that you have SDRs and thought it might be particularly relevant.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. So if it's an option, Luke, I'd like to set up a call with you to speak to this and kind of show you what we're doing in the program to generate the results. Would you be open to that?
Yeah, we can do that. I've got Wednesday afternoon open.
So clearly a better outcome in this case. I make this call all the time, and this is usually how it plays out. So let's pull apart what happened here. If you noticed at the beginning of the call, I stated my full name using a tonality that conveyed to Luke that he doesn't know who I am. Then, instead of stating my company name, I said I was a consultant based in DC. That may sound a little weird to you, but my company name, unless Luke is familiar with it, wouldn't be enough for him to form a mental image of what I represent. But everyone can easily form their own mental image of what a consultant based in DC might look like. After that, I connected the dots between myself and something Luke was familiar with, which in this case, in this example, was one of his investors called Venture Fund. After establishing this common ground, and before asking if he had a minute, I removed resistance, stating that I was just calling with a question. And adding this context is vital because without it, Luke would be left to draw his own conclusions about what he's really committing to and how much time I'm really asking him for. Also, if you noticed, I used a downward inflection at the end of my yes question, and doing that conveys tactful authority as opposed to ending on an up note, right, which would convey neediness and sound like a typical sales call. Doing this effectively will quiet your prospect's mind and keep them relaxed and present with you in the discussion.